Hi, I'm here to talk a little bit about some context for the activities of operators around mobile commerce and commerce generally by looking at some of the disruptor companies, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google and Skype, who are also operating in this market. And I think the real thrust of what I'm going to focus on is the fact that these players are really looking at broad commerce platforms. They're really seeking to build a multifunction and a multi-device or bearer platforms upon which they are building their business model. And that has very serious implications for operators, because the way these players are thinking about their businesses is actually that in some areas they're quite happy to make money, and in other areas they are comfortable losing money. So this is based, this work, on a report we recently did called Dealing with the Disruptors. It's about 300 odd pages, and we have about 50 pages on each of the players, really looking in detail at their strategies and their business models, and then what operators in particular in the telecoms, more broad telecoms industry, can do to respond to that. I'm not going to try and focus on everything today. I'm really going to focus on the overall battleground and how that's playing out, and some of the interactions between these players and with the operators. So just looking at the battlefield itself, we're really focusing on a number of functional areas. Initially, clearly there are the devices itself and the operating systems. Many of these are mobile, but also the PC itself and some of those devices, like newer ones like tablets and so on. And then there's the connectivity, the way in which these devices are connected up, and then a whole series of functions or capabilities that are built on these devices. Advertising, e-commerce, the sale also of virtual goods, payments, enterprise cloud, and of course, increasingly, voice and messaging that is simply just another application. And what's interesting is these companies have core businesses. Their heritage, particularly if we take telcos, for example, in data and connectivity, and also in voice and messaging. The likes of Amazon have focused initially on the sale of books, and then more and more other online, other physical goods. Apple and Microsoft's heritage is, of course, on the device, initially with the PC, and then Apple in particular with its more mobile devices, the iPhone and then the iPad. And then we've got Google and Facebook, two advertising-oriented players. And in the case of Google, assuming the acquisition of Motorola goes through, we kind of feel that they've probably got a second core business now around the device itself. Android was an initial foray into that operating system, and now with the acquisition of Motorola, they've really got a second core business. And what's very clear is these companies actually have complementary businesses. They enable each other to do business. So telcos are incapable of providing voice and messaging and data without the devices themselves. Similarly, many of the disruptor players, Amazon, Apple and so on, are enabled by the data connectivity that operators provide. Similarly, telcos themselves with their connectivity, and particularly Google and Facebook in the advertising they provide, really support the core business of Amazon, the sale of physical goods. So so far so good, the kind of battleground's reasonably clear. What we're starting to see is the encroachment of one player into new spaces across this value chain. So there's already a significant battle going on in devices between Google with its Android operating system, Microsoft looking to make a comeback with the deal it's done with Nokia, and of course the granddaddy who's making most money in this space, Apple itself. But we're getting new players coming in, and one example is Amazon, that is really launched a synergic business with initially the Kindle, and more recently the Fire, which is coming out, which is they're not seeking to make money from the hardware itself. It really is a means by which they can actually deliver books, and increasingly with the Fire, additional content and services. So it's very much the razor and razor blades model. They're not making money from the razor, the hardware itself. They're looking to make money from the blades, the content that goes on it. And that's the first real battleground that we're starting to see around devices, the kind of starting point for all these other services. Looking at online advertising, there's already a big battle growing between Facebook and Google. Facebook is very much around initiating interest in products and services, getting engagement. If my friend's interested in something, I may also become interested. And Google's very much more about fulfilling that demand. Once I want to search for something, I can then put the product or service in, and I get Google responding with that with sponsored ads and so on. And we're starting to see those two clash together because of the potential additional benefit of having recommendations on the search engine from your friends. And Google's activity with Google Plus and some of the changes it's made recently with its search engine really show the threat that it considers itself under from Facebook. But there are other players who are starting to be more active in this space. Microsoft is under some pressure to make money. Its online business has gone about quarter after quarter, year after year, losing money. And MSN and Bing are now, they're really stepping up in attempts to actually get a return on that. So we talk at synergic growth. They're really looking for a profitable growth story there to complement their operating systems and applications, which are now slowing down. And it's interesting to see that Bing has now actually just passed Yahoo as a search engine in the US. Apple's slightly different. It doesn't need to make money from advertising. Its money comes from the hardware. Maintaining the selling price on that iPhone or iPad of $600+ is really the end goal. And advertising is really a means by which it can actually support the developers. If they can make money through advertising, Apple's very, very happy because it needs that developer community to develop the content that adds value to the hardware. So for it, it's a potential loss-leading business. It doesn't need to make money from advertising. And then, of course, you've got the telcos up there at the top. And there is no single telco strategy. What we're seeing is some telcos really believe that with their data, they can add value potentially to the advertising community, to some of these players, these disruptors themselves, by making advertising more relevant, contextually relevant, more targeted. And there are others like Optus with Win Every Time it had in Australia, or O2 in the UK with top-up surprises, and then more recently Priority Moments, where actually they're not making money from advertising at all. They're not charging the merchant or advertiser for using their asset, but they're using it as a way of adding value to their end-user customers by, and therefore retaining customers more effectively. So we've got lots of strategies going on there, but this is the second real battleground, with Google seeking to defend its patch and others moving in there. Moving along, if we look at the sale of online content, the sort of granddaddy there is very much Apple with its iTunes store. And it has games, it has music, it has applications that it puts on that. And again, it makes a little bit of money, but it doesn't need to, as long as that whole ecosystem really supports the value of the core hardware, which is where Apple seeks to make a return. But other players are starting to move into this space. And I think what's interesting is we have a number of different strategies again. If we look at Facebook, it actually, I think, seeks to make money from the sale of online content. Already, Facebook credits are worth about 10% of revenue, and it's a meaningful number, and one that I think, because of the high pressure that it's under from investors, it will, to grow revenue significantly, it will continue to focus on not just advertising, but also the sale of online content. That's very different, I think, from the likes of Google and the likes of Microsoft. They really don't need to make money from the sale of online content itself. And the Android marketplace and the Microsoft App Store are really means by which they add value to their advertising or their hardware and operating system businesses. Again, that's very different from Amazon. Amazon is used to making money based on razor-thin margins. It's an online retailer, and now moving into virtual goods is a natural extension, and it will seek to actually make money there. So we've got different strategies from the disruptors around the sale of online content. And telcos, again, there's no single strategy. Some of them believe that they should support those disruptor app stores and content sales through the use of their data and their other assets. So we've got in-app billing, for example, which is being driven by WAC and other individual operators. And then there are others, particularly in places like the Middle East and Far East, where they still believe that they can develop portals and platforms around their own content, think retail it. But that's really the third big battleground that we see amongst these players. The fourth battleground area is around payments. And what's interesting here is, although payments are a fairly large market, most of these players do not believe that they're going to make significant money from the payment process itself. It's really the point at which they crystallize value. If they can get closer to the payment point with advertising, it drives up the value of the advertising. But Google, even with its recent Google Wallet, is not actually looking to make money from payments itself. And actually, they've seeded the market by giving $10 worth of free money on their Google Wallet. And they don't charge the merchants for payments being made through the Google Wallet. Instead, they're looking to support their core advertising business with the coupons. And I think most of these players really see this as a lost lead in itself. What's quite interesting is that telcos are currently relatively silent in some of their thinking around these different functions of the platform. And they again see payments, I think generally, as a strategic growth area where they can actually make money. And it's going to be very interesting as that battle develops to see whether operators are successful when they're competing against some of these disruptors that I don't think see payments as a profitable growth area. If we look briefly at the enterprise cloud, it's a slightly different story. Amazon clearly has an existing enterprise cloud business that is really developed on the back of its core website. It had big demands for storage, big demands for computer processing, and it's used that and made those available increasingly to other businesses. And the scale that it has on that has also lowered its cost base in its core e-commerce business. Some of the other players are increasingly looking to get into enterprise cloud. Telcos, in terms of platform or network as a service, Microsoft, particularly with software as a service, and Google kind of doing a bit of both, some infrastructure and some software it's making available to small and medium-sized enterprises, not looking to make much money, but relatively small. The reason why we don't think this is a big competitive area is most of these players are operating at different levels of the stack, either at the infrastructure or at the network or at the software itself. So it's not, although it's a competitive market, not particularly amongst these players, which leaves voice and messaging. Hugely important business for the operators, $1 trillion or thereabouts, and increasingly we're seeing it's just another application or service. What's interesting is each of these players, perhaps bar Amazon, are looking to get into this market, either directly or indirectly. Facebook, I think, are going to use some of their directory of 800 million odd users to initiate or terminate calls, and will look to share some of that revenue with operators. So it's a growth business for them. I think similarly Microsoft will, again, it's through its recent acquisition with Skype, will do something similar, and already Skype in and Skype out is really a revenue sharing deal that Skype has with operator community. I think that's very different from the likes of Google and Apple. They really don't need to make money, or particularly want to make money, from communications. And iMessenger is really just about adding value to the iPhone. It's not about making money from iMessenger itself. These players, Google and Apple, really are providing a launch pad with their very established and leading app stores, a launch pad for other services that are free or very cheap, the likes of Viber and WhatsApp, that are directly challenging the operator revenue stream. So this is probably the most important battleground for operators in terms of protecting that voice and messaging revenue. Now, in the report, we cover each of these major battlegrounds, looking at the different strategies of the disruptors and potential strategic responses from the operators. I haven't got time to go through those in detail here, but if you take, for example, advertising, we think there are a number of strategic options for operators. They could continue to disrupt, rather like I mentioned O2 has done by providing a free advertising or couponing service in the UK. If they get together and develop serious scale, they can potentially compete head-on and actually make some money in advertising. And it's interesting, the JV in the UK between O2, Everything Everywhere and Vodafone is looking to do just that, subject to the regulator allowing it through. There's also opportunities to add value to those existing advertising companies, the Googles, the Microsofts and so on, by leveraging their customer data, the information that operators hold about their customer base. And linked to that, they could potentially position themselves as something of a protectorate role, looking after and protecting consumer data and privacy as more and more information about consumer moves online. Lots of strategies that they could deploy, and we're starting to see some of these going on. The second, and I think key point that we want to make here, is that operators at the moment think about each of these battleground areas individually, rather siloed: payments, advertising, content and so on, voice and messaging. The disruptors really have an end-to-end commerce platform strategy, and increasingly we think we're going to have to see operators do something similar, start to consider how they're going to compete across the piece. It's interesting, the JV in the UK that I mentioned encompasses not only advertising but also payments in a joined up fashion. I think we're going to see more of that activity, and it's something that operators are going to have to move towards. I think that's it from me, so thank you very much, and if you have any queries or questions, do get in touch.